And hopefully this will work. Okay, so Long Talks in the Woods is the speaker and discussion series. This is our 13th Long Talks event. It's our last session of 2021. This session or this series aims to be a generative hive, a place for learning, a place for inskillment, a place where people can come to understand current issues in new ways and consider how they would like to engage. It is a capacity building space for change makers. So I am going to introduce Ivan, and then he will share with us a presentation about who we are in the future and reconsidering the human. And then we will take a short break and we'll open up the floor for questions, comments, discussion amongst everyone. Then we will take a moment to summarize where we think this might lead us going forward. And then I'll say a quick note about Long Talks 2022. And we will close the session at noon. So I am very excited and pleased to introduce a colleague and friend, Ivan Vargas Roncancio, who is engaged in postdoctoral research at McGill in the realm of the larger paradigm shifts from environmental law and governance to ecological systems-based and other than human jurisprudence in post-conflict Colombia. He explores law and governance that comes from territory and the ways in which this challenges concepts of justice, agency, and values in times of socio-ecological transition. And some of this comes from studying how humans and other than human beings, such as plants, co-produce protocols for forest governance. He is a lawyer with degrees from the National University of Columbia, Duke University, and McGill. I'm very happy that he has joined us here to share some of what he works with. And I look forward to seeing where our discussions will go. So welcome, Ivan. Thank you for being here with us. And it's all you know. I probably need to give you the ability to share screen. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so very much, John, for the invitation. I'm really happy and honored to be part of this conversation, to get to know you, to get to be part of Long Talks. I know that you have been doing a tremendous effort to make this happen, and the format is incredible. I think it's a very interesting initiative, and I hope the best for future editions of this. So very, very happy to be part of this conversation with you today. So just a little bit about what I do. I'm a Colombian. I'm from Colombia, and I've been living in Colombia for a long time until I moved to the north, which has offered me also so much in terms of learning new experiences, for which I'm also very grateful. I've been working with the Amazonian communities for several years, and especially with the Inga in the southern Colombian Amazon. I'm also interested in questions of law and how we can rethink legal issues from times of ecological responsibility, ecological crisis. So the presentation today, kind of, it's based on ethnographic work with the Inga in the context of developing an indigenous university that is led by this community. They are striving to create a form of knowledge that integrates different traditions, but is deeply rooted in their practices of knowledge making, but also opens up possibility for dialoguing with other traditions. So what I'm doing, what I'll be sharing with you today, is producing the context of talking to elders during the last few years and learning about their experiences with certain ritual plants that are of importance for their medicine practice and also for their decision-making protocols. So I'm very grateful for this, especially for the Inga to open up room for a mestizo scholar to hang out with them and get to learn a little bit about how they do things, how they think about the world, and also to be part of this larger project, which is a long-term vision to create an indigenous biocultural university that is led by them. In that process, they have assembled a community of scholars, practitioners, thinkers. One of them is a very good friend of mine, Ursula Beeman, who's an important leader in the artistic scene, has been pushing this project as well and helped assemble a very interesting group of scholars who are supporting also the creation of this and enhancing the network to make this a reality at some point. So that's sort of a context in which I'm going to be presenting. Also, as Sean mentioned, I'm part of the leadership for the ECOZOI program as a postdoctoral researcher, and the work that I develop with the program has to do with transitions, has to do with images and narratives about the future, has to do with how we can respectfully, mindfully engage in conversation with other traditions, and what are the limits and possibilities of learning from others, and what investments in terms of our knowledge practices and also our positionalities are required for that to be something fruitful, right, for all living species. So with that note, I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to be talking for about probably 35 minutes, maybe less. Please feel free to interrupt at any time. I hope we can engage in conversation, that this could be thought-provoking and especially soul-provoking, because this is the context in which I'm coming from, right? So let's see if I can. Okay. So this image, I've been using this image for quite a bit in presentations. I love it because it's by a good friend of mine, Abuelo Abel Rodriguez, who is a Nunuya elder practitioner who is also a painter. So this image is called the El Árbol de la Abundancia, the Tree of Abundance, and it's sort of part of the Nunuya way of understanding origin and how how the plant, the earth can be imagined as a big tree. And all the animals there are receiving the woods of the tree and also part of this bigger system. So the talk is called Making a Bridge to Non-Western Ways of Thinking, Feeling and Doing. I will be thinking with the idea of Earth Law, which is an emerging tradition in law that tries to think about law beyond the roots between nature and culture, between norms and values and such. So this is sort of an outline of what I will be presenting. First part is, this is based on conversations with some indigenous friends, the Scream of the Earth and the Code. We are all meshwork, which is a key idea for this kinds of, rethinking about who we are in a larger cosmological context. The Scream and the Seven Doors, where I will be talking about time and law, and in the context of plan-human encounters. You cannot live there as doctors and lawyers, which is a challenge about how we engage with other places and other systems of meaning, and what kind of rethinking of who we are might capacitate this learning from other places and other traditions. And then some closing thoughts, thinking about law, governance, transitions, otherwise, and what indigenous legal traditions can teach us in doing this. So part of this is going to be reading some quotes, so bear with me. So the Scream of the Earth and the Code. When I had about 22 years of taking the medicine, the elder said, they said to me, now you know a little about the medicine. They took me to the mountain and told me, if you drink ayahuasca, if you drink yahe, it is to study it. But I never thought about where it will take me. They gave me a little tacita cup of medicine, like this big. This is for you to take and learn. I thanked them and drank it. 2 hours passed and I did not feel anything. I was calm, but then I heard a voice telling me, see, get ready. It is time to get ready. When I heard that voice, I looked around and found nobody. I saw that the firmament began to come down and the earth began to raise. I put up my hands to hold the world so that the world would not fall to the ground. But there was no time. The world came down on me and I fell. And I turned over to the earth and the voice then told me, now scream. Those who were present heard me scream quite loud. That scream was heard deep in the earth. When the earth answered me, she screamed too. I am Mother Earth who gives life to you, and it is why you must listen. In our science of Yahe, the plant, it is never about learning. It is about knowing and feeling. And to study Yahe does not take 4 or 5 years. It takes a lifetime. You will continue to get to know Yahé as long as you are alive, because the science of Yahé is infinite. It doesn't end. We die, but the science continues without us. Yacha, traditional medic C, thus recounted a powerful experience with the Amazonian concoction. The traditional medics of the Colombian Amazon Piedmont have approved an ethical protocol to regulate the ritual use of medicinal plants such as the ayahuasca, Banisteriopsis capi, otherwise known as ayahe. This protocol is known as el pensamiento de los mayores, código de ética de la medicina indígena del Piedemonte amazónico colombiano, elders thinking, ethical code of the indigenous medicine of the Andean Amazonian Piedmont. The code is based on accumulated experience with the plant over generations. In the following, I will briefly summarize the main aspects of this form of indigenous law, which should guide the relationship between indigenous practitioners, medicinal plants, and other non-indigenous persons, including researchers, state officers, companies, and the general public in this region. The protocol or code has numerous references to the notion that it is the plant who teaches or transmits knowledge to humans. In 17 points, it summarizes provisions about handling the plant with respect and knowledge. The aspects covered are as follows: the identity of the traditional medics and their forms of legitimation, the protocols to be followed by traditional medics and apprentices, the relationship between traditional medics, communities, and the outside world, the behavior of medics when performing ceremonies, the sale of healing services and advertising, the relationship between traditional medics and Westerners, indigenous intellectual property rights, very key point, and trade of medicinal plants. In addition, the code includes a proposal for the certification of traditional practitioners to ensure their authenticity, with a detailed reference to the risk involved when charlatans administer the medicine, among other provisions. Even though it is a written document, the code is not reduced to its symbolic expression. Law here is quite literally an ongoing embodied practice of exchange and co-learning between peoples and the territories they are part of. We are all meshwork. We have a thread, the Yahé, the sacred plant that allows us to make this meshwork and to understand our spiritual paths. Those paths are also our signs of the visible and materially palpable coming together in a web of distinct threads. The Yahé allows us to have those dialogues to understand the state of matter and spirituality as an entangled reality. Although we are said to be on the verge of physical and cultural extinction, despite war, conflict, and countless impositions of exterior forces, we are here, the Inga says. However, using the word resistance is not entirely appropriate. It does not allow for the fertile dialogue. It shatters the making of biocultural peace, or peace between us human beings and between humans and the living territory. What we need is then to weave, to make alliances, because in the end, we are in a space we share together. Our responsibility is to take care of this place and to protect it, said Taita H., a traditional political authority of the Inga people who is leading this project of co-creation of the Indigenous University, Taita Hernando Chindoy, good friend of mine. For political leader Taita Hernando, territory is mother, our mother, and the sun is father, our father. The condor, the tapir, and other forest beings are family to us, humans, and the territory is their home or dwelling place. When I plant corn, when I cultivate the chagra, which is a small cultivation system of no more than 2 hectares, I cannot sow only for myself and my family, for my wife and children to have food. When there is a harvest, the squirrel, the deer, the tapir, the turkey, the parrots will come to harvest this corn and those beans too. The territory then is a living person, or better yet, a multitude of people arranged as a form of socio-ecological kinship. For the Inga, the territory is also a meeting point. One Inga family in the valley, in the Sibundoy Valley, told us that to put up a fence means to divide. From this point here to this fence over there, you command. You are the owner. And from that fence over there to where I'm standing here, I am the owner. I am in charge, and no one is allowed to enter without my permission. Those limits that we were taught to think of as barriers are for our cultures and communities are in fact not lines that divide, but meeting points, points of encounter between different beings, says Hernando, as he stands on a rock next to a stream that runs across the territory of a recently founded Inga Cabildo in Mocoa, in Putumayo. This Cabildo groups together dozens of Inga family forcibly displaced from their ancestral lands in the neighboring region of Huila. Intriguingly enough, a black jaguar was spotted a few days later in the very meeting point where Hernando was standing. The territory is not only a person, but also a meeting point then. A place where lifeways meet and cross each other, forming a living tapestry. Anthropologist Tim Ingold defines a way of life as the trajectory of movement and growth of all beings. Every being is instantiated in the world as a path of movement along a way of life. And these paths or lines form a tapestry of co-emergent lifeways that he calls a meshwork, which represents the interconnection between meshwork. To further clarify this notion, Ingold contrasts the meshwork with the idea of a network, which represents rather the interconnection between pre-existent entities in space. He notes that what it is commonly known as the web of life, that is the material relationships between organisms in an ecological community, is not a network of interconnected points, but a meshwork of interwoven and undetermined lines in a particular place that are forming this place, are terraforming. For example, winding rivers, growing plants, moving non-humans, animals and humans, and even language are all ways of life or trajectories of growth and movement relentlessly co-emerging together. So like this little jarumo, this is a kind of a white-looking plant. On there, the jarumo is used, is a plant that is used for preparation of another important decision-making plant, the coca leaf, which when you macerate, then becomes dust that combined with this plant is traditionally used for making decisions, but it's also considered a physical corporal discipline as well, to live a moral life in the territory. For Hernando, meshwork of lifeways expresses a sense of movement and direction, but also a state of rest or meeting point to learn something new about a place. Quote, the black jaguar that inhabits these sacred points between the Andes and the Amazon is the spirit of protection that day by day safeguards this region. The jaguar, our most powerful Wasicama, which is an Inga word to refer to a guardian, is the protector of the ancestral knowledge of the Inga people. This territory has the form of a jaguar in a state of samai, or at rest. And that is why the black jaguar is a very important symbol of knowledge, protection, and harmony. Having the color of the soil, el color de la tierra, that sustains our lives, this territory is embraced with the spirituality of the black jaguar, who is the Maximus Wasicama of the sacred, strategic, and emblematic territories of the Inga people, end of quote. As person and place, territory moves and also rests. When she rests, humans can also see other facets beyond the physicality of experience and know something new about the visible and perhaps invisible realms woven into this territorial tapestry. As a Ingayacha or sabedor or knower from the Sibundoy Valley in the Andean mountains of Putumayo once put it, para aprender hay que quedarse quietico. To learn, you must stay still, quiet, so that you can listen to the scream of the earth branching out through the body of the sentient territory. The scream and the seven doors. When the earth answered, she said, scream hard again. My scream was heard up in the firmament in deep space, and then it turned around as a house with seven doors, and then said, I am the house of seven doors of the power of divine intelligence. This is a quote by Elder Carlos Akinamihoy, whom I had the privilege to meet in the context of the making of this indigenous initiative. I managed to see only the reflection of a light. Go calmly back to earth. I heard this voice again. I returned to earth, and earth told him, Carlos, now put your feet on the earth. You will barely start to know what earth is. I sat down, and then earth flipped over. I detached myself and fell into the abyss, and then came back to earth. I was the only human there. There were no other living beings on earth. Only jungle, jungle, jungle. forests without pollution. The earth you breathed was clean and your lungs were completely clean and protected, totally pure, he said. The trees moved, they walked, they talked, they were alive. If I pointed my finger this way, I guided the water. Wherever I wanted to send water to, the water would follow. The animals, all kinds of animals. My thought was, what am I doing here now? Historiographical accounts of Amazonian region tend to conceal stratified temporalities that escape our modern Western trained perception of time and history. They define these layers as ritual or cultural belief of non-modern peoples. Yahé, the Andean Amazonian concoction, is a door into these other layers, a door to the seven doors. With Yahé's people, a voice commanding Yachasi to scream hard, to then hold the firmament with his own bare hands, human beings learn that time can go beyond human experience. Time is immanent to places rather than a transcendental norm of human abstraction imposed upon territories through the vehicle of language. Quote, if you drink Yahé, it is to study it. In our science of Yahé, it is never about learning. It is about knowing. And to study Yahé does not take 4 or 5 years. It takes a lifetime. You will continue to get to know Yahé as long as you are alive, because the science of Yahé is infinite. It doesn't end. We die, but the science continues without us, says Yachasi. This earthly coemergence of being sustains time, which sustains language, which sustains knowledge as language. Beyond abstract time, then time seems to be something more than the relentless continuity of events our modern trained perception organizes as social and scientific facts, and could even be conceived as a practice of co-creation of worlds through anthropophagic relation. Quote, if you drink Yahé as person, it is to study with it, end of quote. And this idea challenges the way we organize history as a continuum of events with the dubious Eurocentric telos of civilization, development, and progress. This is the idea further challenges the notion that norms and institutions are exclusive human affairs, or the notion that a code is only a set of principles to guide human action in the world. When is this happening? Yachasi asked. It is happening yesterday and here. The future enters the past and the past enters the future in what anthropologist and Yahé practitioner from Colombia, William Torres, calls an eye on temporality. The eye on temporality, the actuality, in eye on temporality, the actuality of the mundane and the virtuality of the sacred intertwine with each other to interrupt the linear historical thread that loosely connects the past of anomie, non-modernity and stagnation with the future of rules, modernity and progress. What if these two sequences co-emerge, namely non-modernity, anomie, and stagnation, and other principles of movement? What if the plant teaches us something new about the ordinary and the everyday, the law, for example, that escapes representation and even language? Something as ordinary as a legal norm. I use the expression common temporality to refer to the human experience of continuity of everyday events and the notion of altered temporality to signal the interruption and discontinuity of this experience through encounters of mutual anthropophagy between the Amazonian plant becoming human people on the one hand, and the human people becoming plant or gente on the other. To be sure, this encounter compels the Yahé practitioner to reckon with the vanishing feeling of a human self who is able to command the waters of a nascent universe. As when Ayachesi found himself alone when he fell into the abyss and then returned to a new earth, thus opening their bodies to the embedded continuities of other forms of life, intelligence, and decision-making. You can't live there as doctors and lawyers. The justice of the spiritual science that makes you fly to other worlds encounters the injustice of science as a form of sedentary rationality. People in our community use this medicinal plant to treat mosquito bites, she says. A high fever. Mama UW points to a nearby tree that she later identifies as quinine. The villagers know that there is a lot of quinine here, and they come and harvest it here. This whole area is already naked. Todo esto está pelado. You cannot live here as doctors or lawyers, you know? Here you can live with empirical knowledge, but that empirical knowledge is not recognized within the scales of the science system. There is already an imbalance at the level of recognition and justice, with the norm, with reality itself, to be sure. That raises the question of subject and object. The empirical people are the objects. They are not recognized as subjects, they are the objects, she says. So there is no justice there either. The elders have always claimed the recognition of us as experts because they are the experts, the elders. I'm gonna hold on 1 second. There was some noise in the background. So there is no justice there either, she says. The elders have always claimed the recognition of us as experts because they are the experts, the elders. One wonders, who invented the chemical mix of two plants, the chagropanga and the yahe vine, so that the combination of these two makes us fly to another universe? Or teletransport you to another world? Who did more research in the forest than a biologist? Well, another, Mama E says. That is the dynamics of justice and injustice. To understand this knowledge in the framework of science, I say science, a spiritual kind of science. Learning how to live there with a living cognitive territory is a form of justice, and this implies the recognition of us as experts. Nevertheless, the land management plans of the Colombian state conventionally describe and enact the Andean Amazonian territories as a background for human action, as a set of natural resources to be extracted in pursuit of the modernist notion of a good life. Despite recent attempts to grant rights to nature in legislation, the territory is still represented as a biophysical reality of sorts, collection of plants, animals, mountains, rivers, and that lack actually sentience, cognitive capacities, and even ethical standing. These modernist conceptions and practices are based on a set of onto-epistemic operations that separate human and non-human beings, both physically and imaginatively, by placing the former on top of any living assemblage and system of meaning. Although this story is well known, it is still pervasive in action, thinking, and social institutions in this region. For example, the notion of ecosystem services, clean air, filtered water, livestock, photosynthesis, nutrient cycling, among others, is based on a modernist assumption of human needs. According to the dominant modernist scientific paradigm, suggests anthropologist Eduardo Viveiros de Castro from Brazil, one can only know something when that something can be seen from the outside. That is, when the world is completely desubjectivized and no intentions are attributed to the object of study, plants, animals, complex tropical ecologies. On the other hand, for Amazonian societies, something can only be known when intentionality is attributed to it. That is, when the former object becomes a kind of subject of person with whom one can converse, negotiate, and whose will one must surrender to. See, get ready, it is time to get ready. When I heard that voice, I looked around and found nobody. I saw that the firmament began to come down and the earth began to raise, he said. How can humans and territories co-create knowledge to live well together? How do non-modern conceptions of territory and clans transform conventional decision-making paradigms that exclusively rely on rational deliberation between humans alone? The ancestral Inca territory situated at the intersection of the Andean Cordillera and the Amazon basin encompassing the regions of Putumayo, Caquetá, Cauca, and Nariño. The forests of these interconnected regions express unique ecocultural characteristics of both the Andes and the Amazon. The Piedmont Andino-Amazónico, for example, is considered one of the greatest sources of biophysical richness in the hemisphere, with enormous climatic and ecosystemic variability. In the Amazon alone, for example, there are more than 14,000 species of seed plants, flowering plants, and cichlids. Moreover, while the rich soils of the Andean slopes have favored an economy based on coffee, in the case of Nariño, beans in the case of the Sibundoy Valley, and other cash crops, the Amazonian ecosystems are characterized by their fragility, and most of them are located on poor soils that are very vulnerable to rain and sun. This means that once the forest is cut down, the fertility of these acidic and thin soils quickly depletes. However, the great biological viability and resilience of this region is not due to its soils, but to the way in which its ecosystem function in a feeding cycle of aerial and subterranean interaction of Andean and Amazonian geographies and systems of meaning, pretty much like the combination of these two plants, right? The prevailing environmental conditions of high humidity and heat, as well as the intimate ecological knowledge and proven effectiveness of indigenous territorial governance systems. Like these aerial and subterranean interactions, the Inga raise their batons and weave their lives across different worlds as they listen to the scream of the earth. So here are some closing thoughts. Hoy bailemos porque mañana no sabemos is a motto that the Inga use in an annually carnival. Carnival is called the Carnival of Forgiveness, where all the Inga peoples that are spread out from different parts of Colombia and even the world, because they are in everywhere actually, they come together to the Sibundoy Valley and to engage in celebration of a new harvesting cycle, but also to forgive each other for the deeds that have been done before over the last year. Climate change and COVID-19 have revealed the limited response capacity of environmental law and governance models that insist on the separation between law, society, and their systems of sorts. A paradigm shift based on epistemic plurality and relational praxis is needed. How do indigenous cosmologies and legal systems contribute to this ongoing global paradigm shift in law? Beyond the rise of nature approach, how does a law that is already entangled with territories and practices such as the ingestion of medicinal plants challenge anthropocentric concepts of justice, agency, and value for these times? What can plants teach us about justice? These are the broader questions this story wanted to raise for conversation today. The law is conventionally defined as a system of normative statements that is as language alone or a form of symbolic representation of humans. However, the law can also be defined as a non-symbolic system comprising ecological relations, lived experience, artifacts, dreams, among other sources. This expanded definition is based on a bold, perhaps ontological assumption, namely that humans are not only thinking selves, are not the only thinking selves in the world. And here I'm thinking with Eduardo Conch, an anthropologist who works in the Ecuadorian Amazon. More broadly, this means, he says, that life thinks, or that life is semiotic. That is, beetles, plants such as the yahe, fungi, fish, and tapirs are not only sentient but also cognitive and meaning-making selves. They represent the world in one way or another. Expanding the notion of representation to humans, plants, and other beings has profound implications for legal thinking and justice in Amazonia. If on a fundamental level the law is defined as a system of representations, that is, as a system of signs that include language as well as other sign modalities, then fungi, beetles, plants, and forests can teach us something crucial about law and justice, about where they come from, what they do, how they change over time, and how they can contribute to addressing different socio-ecological challenges today. However, such a broad definition of law and justice would be untenable unless we humans open ourselves to the possibility of a mode of social legal agency that exceeds us. That is a mode of doing things in the world, for example, making decisions about so-called environment or adjudicating justice, whereby human perspectives are considered one among many in a larger cosmological meshwork of forces and lifeways. And contrary to modernist views that separate nature and culture, this suggests a form of continuity and cultural interiority, if you will, between humans and other beings that invites us to reimagine law and justice for times of ecological crisis and profound transformations. Plants such as the yahe, Panisteropsis capi, are masters, partners, and sources of an ancestral yet emergent and rapidly evolving form of justice in Amazonia and perhaps beyond. An earth-oriented, or rather vegetal legal thinking and praxis requires certainly post-anthropocentric analytical frameworks and methodologies. For example, Eduardo Conch suggests that what we humans share with other animals and plants is not only our physicality, quote, but the fact that we live and through signs, that signs make what we are, and that this is important for evolutionary processes. And this strong ontological assumption might also offer a compelling methodological guidance for earth law praxis, the idea of a rise of nature, for example. To be sure, learning law from the vantage point of a territory requires thinking with this territory as a person of sorts, rather than an object of scientific description alone. In the Amazon, thinking with medicinal plants or learning what plants can teach us about governance and justice involves by necessity what we can call embodied methodologies, such as the ingestion of plants as gente, following the code that I just referred a few minutes ago. Insofar as they erase from direct experience, ritual, dream, work, and imagination, things that most anthropocentric legal theory seems to relegate to the status of cultural belief or myth. For the Inca communities of southern Colombia, though, the law is based on four main pillars or mandates, namely, do not steal, do not lie, do not be lazy, and live with dignity. For centuries, the Inga and the Caquetá Putumayo, Cauca, and Nariño regions have designed different social institutions to resolve conflicts arising from non-compliance with these mandates that emerge from the land. So with this, I focus on one of these institutions, the ingestion of law, of Yahea's law as a form of interspecies justice, or as Yachesi shows us, listening to the scream of the earth. When humans encounter the plant, they reflect on the sources of consequences or the actions and learn how to correct course, guided by the traditional medic and plant itself. As a way of resolving conflicts, repairing cosmological relations, and restoring harmony between human people and between human people and other than human people, including las cosas invisibles, the invisible things, the ayahuasca consejo or advice enacts a form of non-symbolic justice, or not only symbolic, better, at the margins of the state and capital. What can current Colombian state models of transitional justice, this is a last question, based primarily on liberal modern notions of reparation and accountability, learn from this form of embodied justice? Learning with territories, plants, animals, and other beings seems to go beyond symbolic analysis, though, requiring forms of embodied engagement with these beings to the extent that they can suspend the representation as usual and critique as we usually understand these terms in social sciences, so that the human drinker can fly to other worlds, as Mama Guaira was saying. Inga legal cosmopraxis, to say it, involving the ingestion of plants as people is an expression of a form of justice otherwise for times of profound political and legal transitions in Colombia. So these are just questions to think with. I can just put there, but this might be more interesting perhaps. How can we bridge the gap between imagination, methodology, and legal decision-making in a new dimension of the law that we might call ontological, something that goes beyond just norms as usual, but something that is embedded in ecologies, for example, with this notion that the law comes from the land? How can we foster a legal activation of relationality, that is the activation of relational thinking and in concrete scenarios of legal learning and adjudication, for example? So I wanted to end by acknowledging the Inga and the Cofan communities I've been working with for some years, especially Taita Hernando Chindoy, Flora Macas, Huayra Hakanamihoy, our friends Ursula Beeman, and an important group of friends as well that are part of this community, of this effort of making the Indigenous University, Giovanna Micarelli, Álvaro Hernández, Santiago del Hierro, Juliana Ramirez, among others, Marcela Bravo, the leadership for the Ecozoic program, McGill University, and the Earth Law Center as well, who has been supportive of these things as well. So yeah, I hope, I think I did the 40 minutes. Just gonna stop sharing. And thank you so very much. I hope this can spark some conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivan. That is a lot for us to think about. There's a lot of rich starting points there. One thing we often do is have a little bit of time before we get into the deep discussions, which we'll do after the break. But if there are any like very specific questions that anyone has for just clarifying questions, then we can potentially address those right now. Otherwise, we can take a break and reflect a little bit and think about what we want to talk about. So, okay, maybe that's what's going to happen. Okay, so we're going to take a 5-minute break. We will come back at, I guess, 10:52. And then we will really get into it. But go brew a cup of tea and reflect on that. And thank you for that great and inspiring presentation. Okay. And I will stop recording.
See you in a minute.